Today we sit down with Chris Savage, the founder and CEO of Wistia, a company he started 15 years ago that is an innovative product leader in the video marketing application space. In this conversation, we talk about the trials and tribulations that Chris faced in growing his business, where at one point he raised debt to buy his own company back from early investors. At that point, they determined to stop growing for growth's sake, and that the secret to scale would be focus. They then used their culture to enact strategy through their organization by cascading the objectives and the communications through the organization and took their business to new heights. Without any further ado, Chris Savage. Chris, welcome to the Entrepreneurs United podcast. Look forward to learning a little bit more about your entrepreneurial background. I know you like to build things and talk loudly about building things.
I do, yep.
So can you please give ourselves and our audience a little bit of your background entrepreneurially in terms of where that all came from?
Yeah, so Wistia, the company I run, started 15 years ago in 2006, and basically saw at the time online video starting to change dramatically. And so my co-founder and I went to Brown together, graduated in 2005. 2005 was the year that YouTube launched, and I was paying really close attention to that, partially because in school I majored in film and video. Okay. And so I'd made a lot of short films. I'd worked on a feature-length documentary. I'd done a bunch of different stuff. And so I was very aware and looking for online like film communities. And I'd been a part of these communities. I'd always been early online. It's early, AOL came early in my home. I was very excited about that.
Yeah.
And pre-YouTube, a lot of these other communities never really took off, and it was funny because the people who could make the video were in the communities, but there wasn't that much new stuff. Like you could go and look, and like each week there'd be like 3 new short films or whatever, if that.
Yeah.
And that was like due to the technology of making video having to be with film up until right around this time. It was people being confused about putting stuff online. Online was like the opposite. Like everything I was taught about how to edit and how to shoot was keeping things at the absolute highest quality at all times. Yep. And when you put it online, it was instantly terrible quality, and people didn't know how to do it. Like they literally were stumped. So we saw YouTube happen and thought this huge change was happening. And so my co-founder and I had always talked about starting something, and we just decided like, this is the moment, get the beginning of a wave. I thought it was going to be 6 months, not 15 years and counting. We just thought that, we thought we'd build a startup, and we were so naive that we're like, well, in 6 months, we'll sell this to someone, or we'll just fail and tell no one that we attempted it. That was kind of our approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, and then it's worked out really amazing. It's continuing to grow, and it's been really exciting. But I always my dad is a professor of computer science.
Okay.
My older brother worked at Microsoft early, and so I was like a beta tester growing up. Like the day that the DVD machine came out, we had it. Like I had like an NES really early. I had all these things like early because my dad was like, "We have to try this stuff, son. Like, let's go." And so I was, used to that stuff. Like I beta tested the Xbox and all these things. I was so fortunate to get the experience to do that. And so when it came time to like spot a new thing taking off and jump in, it made a lot of sense.
Well, that's interesting. You do seem like an early adopter. I remember, a few reference points you make about AOL. I remember back in 1996, having my computer and, you
got mail.
Yeah.
And getting in there and playing around. And, when you started Wistia in 2006, one of the companies I was working with at the time, or started at the time, we found a niche in the professional photography space because professional photographers were moving from film to digital. And that was around 2003. So for you to have moved into video in 2006, I mean, that's really, really early. To your point, I mean, YouTube had just started around that time. So, wow. So I definitely get the early adopter building testing.
Sometimes I've learned it's not that hard to predict what's going to happen. It's hard to predict when it's going to happen. When will the shift really happen? And like a lot of stuff that's happened actually, even because of COVID, is stuff I honestly thought was going to happen 3 or 4 years into building the business, right? Yeah. And isn't it like we overestimate what's going to happen in 5 years usually, and underestimate what can happen in 10? And in our space, like we started focusing on businesses because there was no other option and no one was focused on them. And that meant that we could serve them really well. And, we were competing with DVDs at the beginning. That's what it was. Like, it was like, do you want to send DVDs around the world to get feedback or to share things privately in your company? Or do you want it to be online?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. That sounds amazing. How long does it take online? It's like, it's instant. Like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. It was a very easy thing. But yeah, it was just always actually one of the things in our space that's been interesting is that like people were just often afraid to get on camera.
Yeah.
And just like people are afraid to public speak, it's like a very similar thing.
Yeah.
I think that I didn't understand how much that could slow growth in the early days. Mm-hmm. And then as people got more comfortable, as generations started to change, and people who grew up with video and then grew up with Instagram, they grew up with Snapchat, all these things started to happen. Video at work went from like I don't know what the ROI is, like, duh, of course you need it.
Yeah.
And then you throw COVID on top of it, everything remote, and it's been bananas. It's been absolutely wild. And so, yes, hard to predict when it will happen, but
I love that, right? We overestimate what will happen in 5 years, underestimate what happened in 10. And here you are, probably starting Wistia in 2006. People are wondering, what is Chris doing? We don't get it. Why do you need to have video online? And why do you need to have publication tools to post your videos online? That makes no sense whatsoever.
Yep.
How did you stick through those times when people just didn't get it and you were seeing like Netflix DVDs show up in your mailbox? You're like, why isn't this online? How did you stick through those times? And talk to us about some of those trials and tribulations as you're, in the early years of Wistia trying to figure out what your business model is going to be.
Oh, I'm laughing because there's been so many trials and tribulations. No, I think sticking with it. Actually, eventually, it was like, I'm going to say 5 years in when we really started to get true traction. Not like each month being like, felt like ground zero up. And I should also mention, it was way less startups back then.
Yeah.
There's less people to talk to about this. There's less an understanding of like how fast should things grow or like what's normal in terms of what's slow and what's fast. It was just confusing.
Yeah.
And, we also caught the transition to services and like AWS, right? Like we were using AWS, and our first bill on AWS was like 30 cents. And our first bill for our CDN was like literally 8 cents. And it took years to get into the dollars. Like it was not like it happened like really quickly. It was like it took time. But it was about 5 years in, and I was asking myself that question. I'm like, how am I still doing this? Like I did not expect to do this. And it really came down to I think every day waking up and not knowing what you're going to do. I started to get addicted to that. And like, hey, no one's going to tell me what to do. I have to figure it out. And it turns out I'm figuring it out with people that I really love working with. And so we're all in it every day being like, what's the most important thing? And that's the entrepreneurial journey, right? Yep. Is like, there isn't an answer. Maybe there's a best practice, but you're just trying whatever you can to figure out how to move forward. And it turns out it really, really matters who you're working with. It matters who the early team is, but it turns out it matters who the later team is. It just always matters. Like, and it kind of comes back to me or just around culture. Like if the culture of your company is actually engaging and fun, like if it's a place that you actually want to work at, not because of perks, but because the work itself is motivating, then it's not hard at all. It's not hard to keep going at all. It's actually, that's what you want to do. And I mean, I've talked about this before, but 4 years ago, we had the opportunity to sell the business. We decided not to and did this like debt buyback and all this stuff. And people are like, why are you doing this? Why would you not sell the company when you can get this incredible return? Isn't that the way people start companies? And yes, it is usually often why people start companies. But the thing we realized was like, well, if we sold this, we're just going to want to keep this thing. We're going to want this feeling of trying to grow, and we're going to want to be with a great team, and we're going to want to be in the same market because we understand it so well, and it does feel like it's still early, and all these things. And I just feel like that's I'm living the dream, right? Like being able to actually enjoy the entrepreneurial journey is so incredibly fulfilling that it makes it feel like 15 years is nothing. As like how long I can keep doing this forever, as long as it's like engaging and fun.
I love the angle that you're talking about these things with. I almost want to take a step back and understand the business a touch. I know, looking on your LinkedIn, Wistia is a video marketing application. I don't even know what that means. What
Mhm.
is it? What is the product or service
Mhm.
that your business does?
Yeah. So it's evolved a lot, constantly evolving. But effectively, what it is we're giving tools to marketers to try to make their lives of using video easier, help them get more value out of video, enable video in different places, understand the impact of the videos that they make, and really get more done, and present themselves really well. So that looks like really incredible video hosting at its basics. So works incredibly well across the world, every device. Adaptive streaming, all that kind of stuff. A customized player that gives you all the benefits, not YouTube. So when people search, they find videos on Google, like they're going to end up going to your site, not onto YouTube. You should put your content on YouTube also. Like YouTube's a massive search engine, obviously. But everything about Wistia is about giving you the control. So when people find your stuff, they're on your site. You can add interactivity in the videos, make people, for example, put in an email address before they watch something. And so, take your recorded webinars and get more value out of them because people will sign up to watch that stuff. And all of this can be done without any design work or any engineering work. It's all just like done inside of the platform. We have video creation tools so you can record with your webcam and your screen simultaneously and quickly make a video that looks really good. We have second by second heat maps to track how people are watching. So you can figure out two things, like basically who's interested in your audience, but then also on aggregate, how do you make your content better? So if you see people are all turning the video off at some point, you should go look at the context of that. And there may be a reason. Sometimes there's funny things where like you make one comment that is an indication, you don't realize it's an indication to the audience that the video is done, and it's actually not. And there's like these little simple things like that that actually add up to make a really big difference. And then we have publishing tools so that you can present a channel of videos on your website, like almost like you can be the same or different, similar to whatever is in your YouTube channel. But there, you can have people subscribing via email. You can publish that out directly. So you upload a video into Wistia, you hit publish, they get notified, you grow your email list, and then you also can syndicate it to YouTube and Facebook and all the other things to kind of generate more traffic. We host podcasts, so it's kind of all of these things in one platform that's just really easy to use.
So let me just validate. It's one platform that has editing tools, diagnostic ability, and publishing tools. Is that relatively accurate?
Yeah, that's like the simple way. Yeah.
Okay. And then just out of curiosity, in terms of the market, what percentage of businesses do you feel are using some type of video or media as advertising? What percent are doing it now that are in the customers who you're marketing to? And then what percent do you think should?
So because of COVID, an extremely high percentage has now tried video. Pre-COVID, it was like probably something like 20%. And then because of COVID, we hit like 80% or something of businesses have now tried video because they had to replace in-person interactions, and they have to communicate to people who could be in person or remote, or they wouldn't be able to get access to otherwise. And it turns out just being on Zoom all day isn't that fun. And asynchronous communication is very helpful. And then I think, but what's interesting is that what that's saying is that most of the market is just getting started, and people are trying to figure out like when should they make video and when should they not. And it's probably 30% of the market is like actively has figured out how to incorporate video into what they do, something like that.
Got it. Yeah, if we just break down the math, explosive growth for you around COVID, right? You had 20% of all businesses were your target market or available to want to even consider your services prior to COVID. Now it's 80%. So you're right. You just do the simple math. You go 60% of businesses, they're new in the last 2 years at doing this. Just another quick question or two about the business so I can understand how it's set up. How many people are employed by your business?
A little more than 150.
Okay. And Can you just kind of bucket some of the roles? What do the 150 people do?
Yeah, there's a bunch of people who build software. There's some people who help to enable building a company, the services to the teams. And then there's a bunch of people who, um, you know, figure out how to talk to customers and go on a spectrum of like, one to infinite to one to one. And so, yeah, it's a little more than a third building and little more than a third talking to customers, maybe more than that, 40%. And then everybody else, the back end stuff that you need, the services that you need to scale a business.
Okay. Yeah, massive amount of people, especially when you started in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
The growth from where you are. How many people did you add between when COVID started and now?
Yeah, so 50% of the team is new since COVID.
Okay.
But we've natural attrition, and so there's people who have left for lots of good reasons. So it's like probably we were about 100 before COVID, so about 50, 55 new folks in net.
So you added 50% of people, so that's about 75 people in the last 2 years. Can you talk about the growing pains that come along with that, and how do you hold consistency to the software build, to how the company is being built, to how talking to customers happens when you have explosive growth of 50% addition of people who all have different thoughts, different backgrounds, different aspirations, different dreams for where they could take the company? How do you hold that ship together, Chris?
Yeah. I love this question. People don't ask this question enough, actually. I feel like it's just assumed that it's all roses and sunshine and rainbows, but it's not. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I think the fortunate thing is that we have built systems to manage strategic change in the past. Like the company's evolved a lot, right? Like when we started, Wistia was just private video sharing. And then we started adding embedding and the business started to take off. And then we had to make a hard decision, which way do we go? And then we went towards embedding, and then that led us towards marketing. And then we expanded to include creation tools. And then we thought we might like spin the creation tools out. And then we realized we'd bring the creation tools back in. And then, I can go through many large changes that the business has gone through. And then the buyback itself, when we did that in 2017, talk about a thing that's confusing is like, hey, we're going to raise debt. Who does that in tech? Very few people, especially someone at our size. We were like a $17 million run rate at the time. We're going to raise $17 million of debt. We have $17 million run rate. We're going to do a buyback. And like all that stuff was confusing and it was scary to people because debt seems bad if you haven't thought about it. And we learned through that process, basically, like for us to communicate really, really hard things, we have to cascade the communication. And so what that means is like, we start with the senior management team, make sure that the senior management team, everyone has a chance to push back, ask hard questions, really understand and believe exactly why we're doing what we're doing if we're making a big change. And then we take that to all the managers on the team and do the exact same process again and say, this is what we're trying to do. And the questions that they have and the concerns they're going to have are going to be different. And then we'd roll it out to the whole company. And at that point, what that means, if we have an all hands meeting, the whole company has now like heard this. Anyone can go to their manager and get an answer on why we're doing what we're doing. So stress doesn't build. It allows us to like keep things actually very calm. And then we do Q&A with the whole company the day after we do the all hands meeting. And the reason is that people need time to think. And so you introduce a new thing or a big new thing, whatever. Sometimes there's going to be people who are ready with questions, but otherwise they're not. But we've kind of built this system over time. And it's worked really well. So part of hiring people is remembering that like every one of those meetings and every one of those communications, you have to optimize for people who are new. But what that also does is it's a constant reminder to people who are already here of exactly what it is that we're doing. And you learn as an organization gets bigger, you have to say the same thing over and over and over and over. And you have to say it in different ways. And like, I think one of the challenges of scaling is you have less time with each individual person. And so if you make a flippant comment, like a joke, or there was a time I'll remember, we had some smart speaker in the office. And I went up to it and I said, start playing like Blink-182. And I was like, I listened to Blink-182 in high school. There was like a new album out. I'm like, this will be fun. And I had not listened to Blink-182 in years, like literally 15 years. And then like 4 months later, I happened to be sitting next to someone at lunch or something. And they're like, Chris, hey, do you know Blink-182 is coming to town? Like, are you going to the concert? Like, are you doing this thing? And it's like, what? Like, I didn't know that. Like, and this, like, what I realized is this 30-second interaction had in their head, they're like, Chris loves Blink-182. And of course he loves it so much, he's playing it with us. So he's going to go to the like, it had been this magnified moment. And that's an example about a non-work thing. Now imagine you have like a complicated, plan or roadmap or whatever. Just like things get confusing. And so I've also learned that it really is true that actions and what you do matter a lot more than what you say, and letting people will model what you do as a leader. And so it's just really important, all these moments that are like, you're adding a lot of people, you have to cascade the communications. You're adding a lot of people, I have to run my senior management team really well. And if I run my senior management team really well, that everyone like feels and knows what it's like to run a team well, they're more likely to run the teams in the different departments well. And that actually cascades through the organization. I don't have to tell anyone how to run a meeting. You just have to set the example. But the opposite's also true. Like if you are running things really chaotically and doing things at the last second, guess what? Don't be surprised when that cascades through the organization. And so, I just think it's a lot of those things. And it's trying to write stuff down. I know this sounds simple, but like every time we get bigger, I realize, there's another thing we haven't written down that was kind of assumed and understood, that when you join a 50-person company, it's really different than you join a 15-person company, or you join a 150-person company. It's really different than joining a 100-person company. And actually, like, yes, there are things you'd be shocked that you have to explain, but by explaining them really clearly, it gets everyone up to speed faster and allows you to go in the same direction more easily.
You just gave, I think, a master class on cascading communication. You started with senior management team, but I'm going to assume you also have an executive team, that you're not the only one who's making strategic decisions, that you have a smaller team outside of your senior management team. Is that accurate?
I mean, it's very small, but yes.
Yeah. So very small, like typically executive team, very small, like 5 or less.
Yeah.
That are the people who you would not make an important decision strategically without consulting.
Yes, although we treat our senior, we bring a lot of those strategic decisions to the senior management team, which is about like 10 people. And I think it's a mix of people who have been around for a while and scale with the business, and people who are newer. And I always think of it as like, I need people to be exposed to this thinking and how when we are handling these really hard things, because like, as the company grows, in 2 years, like you might be managing a part of the business that's 20 people today. It could be 50 people in 2 years, and you're going to be dealing with problems that are similar that we're dealing with today as the company. So everyone has to be constantly learning. So just kind of like in the efforts of like helping to get more people thinking in that way, we tend to go like a little bit broader. But yes, there is a very small team that like the biggest strategic.
Yeah. So break this down for me real quick. On the executive team, that's the inner circle. How many people are there? You plus how many?
It's really like 3 people.
Okay. So you got 3 people on an executive team who make some strategic decisions, but then you also interface with your senior management team, which is 10 people. For strategic decisions and cascading communication. Then your senior management team repeats the meeting you had with them to go to your management team. How many people are on your management team?
That's probably 25 people.
Okay. So you're going from 3 in exec team to 10 in senior management to 25 in the management team to 150 in your all hands. And you're maintaining consistency in the thread of communication through all of that. And then you had mentioned you're optimizing it for the newest person, so you're not talking over their head. Again, I think that's awesome. Where did you learn that? Or did you just make that up, trial and error?
I learned that here. Yes. No, I mean, it's been trial and error. And, it's funny, like even our all hands meeting was really just like at the beginning, it was a stand up. And it was like every Thursday at lunch, we're going to get together as a company. And we're like 10 people. Everyone's going to say what they're working on this week. And we did that till we were like 25 people or something. And then we're like, this is not working. And we switched it to show and tell of like, all right, you can get up and show and tell what you've learned and what you're working on, what things are coming up next. And then that evolved into like, oh, we have to have one that is like for anyone to present at. And we have to have one at the same time slot that's once a month that's really more like top down. And then it was this realization of like, it was really the realization of the buyback that changed it, because we hadn't had major, enormous change. And the buyback was so just kind of different that we felt that we had to figure out a way of communicating that. We were also at the time going through strategic change. So it was kind of like these things together got me to a place of realizing like, oh, every time I have to treat, like, it's almost like the more I value and understand the need of the team to have like clarity to get their job done, the more effort we should put into that communication to make it crisp and clear and cut out the stuff that doesn't matter. And then we should be testing that and then realize, oh, testing it is actually, it's not about testing. It's about getting buy-in. It's about getting pushback and having people represent their teams. And it kind of just evolved to a place where, not everything gets cascaded. There are certain things that are like, they happen too quickly or they're not, world changing. They're like smaller things that like, yeah, you don't need to cascade those things. But when a big thing is coming, that's when it's like particularly important that you do it. And it was just kind of like, trial and error, honestly.
Chris, I think we need to dive a little bit deeper into this pivotal moment in your business, because you've mentioned it a few times and would like to understand maybe a little bit more mechanically, even if you gave an example of what you mean by this. But you had an opportunity to sell your business. You decided not to. You said, you know what, there's no place I'd rather be than right here with these people doing this. Why sell this thing? And you raised debt to do a buyback. Can you define a little bit what that means exactly? If I'm an entrepreneur listening, going, look, I know how to raise equity. I know what that means. But what do you mean raise debt to do a buyback? What specifically does that mean fundamentally? And why and how did that change everything strategically and how now you would start communicating with your business?
Yeah. So I think to answer that question, I have to go back to the potential acquisitions. And the reason that these were important ones were, people have always tried to acquire Wistia. And it's like, if you're in SaaS or you're a direct to consumer business, like, guess what? People try to buy stuff because they want to consolidate it, because they want to like rip it down to, its baseline and make it hyper profitable, whatever. Like there's always reasons that people, because they want the talent, like there's just like constant conversations and stuff happening.
Sure.
And we always just ignored these because we're having a great time. And it's just like, why even have these conversations? This is a waste. But in 2017, there were 3 different companies that I respected who all came to try to acquire us at exactly the same time, within the same month. And we're like, wow, maybe things are really changing. This is wild. And my co-founder and I got into the conversations with folks this time and like took these acquisition conversations seriously.
Yep.
And it wasn't until we had, a deal sitting in front of us of like exactly how much we'd sell the business for, that we went and we sat down. We're like, all right, this is how much we'd sell the business for. This is how much we'd get. What would happen if we sold?
Yeah. Gut check moment.
Yeah. And we're like, okay, well, they told us you're not going to stay here more than 2 years. And it's funny because at the time I had believed in my mind, I was like, oh, well, if they buy us, they're going to want our help, like growing their business. And so that's what I should be excited about, the long-term thing. And I was actually feeling like I was getting convinced, like this could be sweet. And they're like, no, you're not gonna be here 2 years. I'm like, actually, that's probably more. That's more like it. Like, I don't want to have a boss. Like, this is not good. It's gonna be 2 years. So what are we gonna do in 2 years? Well, Brendan and I, my co-founder, were like, well, we'd start another company together. Like, we work together extremely well. And we complement each other's skill sets. So we'd go do that. Okay, what space would it be in? We're like, well, the video space is, as we talked about earlier in this podcast, took a lot longer than we thought it would, but it feels like it's starting to change. With all these other ideas for the space that we've never gone after because it felt like too early. So we're like, all right, we go back in the video space.
Yep.
And we're like, who would we hire? And we start going through a list of people we know. They happen to work at Wistia. We start talking about like, What kind of culture would we want to build? We want to build a lasting culture. We want to build a culture that's fun and creative, yada, yada. And we realized, we try to rebuild Wistia if we sold the business. But then we're like, why do we have to rebuild it? And this was the key insight. It was like, actually, we were both unhappy. And we had not admitted it to each other. And I think we were both afraid to admit it. Because like, if I said to Brennan, hey man, I'm unhappy, he'd be like, oh, I'm unhappy too. Like, oh shit. Like, what have we done? Like, what did we break? And so when we admitted in this moment that we're both unhappy, we're like, why are we unhappy? Well, a couple of years before, we had switched from being profitable to doing everything we could to search for additional revenue growth. And it was just like, we've been profitable. I got lots of advice from other folks. Like, if you're profitable, you're screwing up. If you're profitable, then that means you're not investing enough in growth. Companies are valued based on revenue growth, not on profitability. Like, you guys are screwing up here. You're missing an opportunity. And we eventually listened and we threw the throttle down like crazy 2 years before. And we had been hiring people left and right. And from the outside, it looked like Wistia was more successful than ever because we're launching new program after new program after new program. But on the inside, what the truth was like, we had zombie projects. We had smart people on bad projects. We'd lost the ability to ask a question when we were doing something new, which was like, is there something we're doing that's not working that we should stop to do this new thing? And that's a thing that happens naturally when you're profitable. And it doesn't happen when you have like unlimited funds, which is, and we never had to raise money to do this. That's the fortunate thing. We were able to fund all this growth with like our previous, like the cash we built up and the fact that we were previously profitable. But Brent and I looked at each other and we're like, we have to get back to that. We have to get back to being profitable. But then, we never raised venture capital. We did raise angel money. And those angels, they wanted us to sell. And of course they did. Like, we were going to be an incredible return for them. Yeah. Probably make most of their portfolios if we sold at that moment. So by not selling, it's like how we need to get them on. Like, remember, it's all taking longer than I thought. Like, we need to get them on board with sticking around for even longer. And so we realized, okay, we want to get to being profitable again. We also want to realign with the angels and the team we gave equity to. And if now we're not going to sell at a moment like this where it could change people's lives if we sold, we can make the decision for ourselves. It felt irresponsible to make that decision for everybody else. And so we came up with an idea, which was, what if we raise debt and we use this debt to do a buyback? So it's like a leveraged buyout. We leverage the business. It's like taking a mortgage on the business.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of pulling those future profits forward to now. And we will offer to folks that we will buy back their shares at a price that was basically the same price as the acquisition offer.
Okay.
And we thought that if we did this and it forced us to be profitable, then what would happen is we would actually get back to like all the long-term, exciting, creative, interesting things we were doing when we were profitable before. And we had felt like a lot of those things were the things that were driving growth. And they were hard to track, but that was part of the magic, was like, if we're profitable, it's easy to do. But if you're not profitable, you're always worried about that revenue growth the next month.
Yeah.
And so psychologically, we thought we might actually do better if we had less resources going into the business and we were profitable.
Yeah.
And the debt would also force that. It would absolutely force us to do that. And it wasn't going to be like, hey, everyone, slow down, and be like, oh, it was like, no, we have to do this. And so we did that deal in October 2017 and realigned the business. It also meant my co-founder and I went from like, having these investors who had preferred shares and had extra controls and stuff. We converted everyone to common shares.
Yep.
So it meant that we just had outright, complete and utter control of the business. And then it worked better than I ever could have imagined. So in 2017, the year that we did the deal, we had negative EBITDA of like $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2018, we had EBITDA of $6 million.
Wow. And
so it was massive change. And what it also meant is like the debt we'd raised in the first place is a pretty high interest rate and kind of risky. But because we had so much profitability, we were able to refinance it, get it down to be really cheap debt. And so suddenly we had all this freedom. And then, oh yeah, by the way, our revenue growth accelerated when we did this because everyone got more focused. And it powered us like forward. And, this is pre-COVID, right? And so when COVID hit, we were in this amazing position because we actually didn't have to lay anyone off. We weren't afraid. We were able to be really generous with our customers. We gave tons of companies free accounts and schools free accounts and stuff. And so I think it made an enormous difference in the first few months of COVID when we had a huge amount of growth. And like, had we not been profitable, I think we would have been extremely tempting to charge people like, market rates and stuff for all of this. Yeah. And instead we were able to be incredibly generous at that moment. And ultimately it was like way better for the brand and business to do that.
Chris, this is an amazing story. I mean, you said earlier about communication that, one thing you learned is actions speak louder than words. Well, putting your money where your mouth is, right? And raising debt like you guys did to buy back the business, get rid of any investors or even employees that maybe earned, a growth appreciation in the business, and say, no, we're going to put our money where our mouth is here, because this is what we want to do. This is the culture we want. This is the industry we want. This is the people we want to work with. Why leave? Why leave? But let's just put it in gear here. And the fact you were able to have this radical candor, I guess is the word that comes to mind with you and your partner. Be like, okay, what's going on here, and what do we need to do to fix it? I love it. And one quick question I have, in terms of where you raise debt, you mentioned there's a little higher interest rate because you're a little riskier.
Yeah.
I'm assuming this wasn't a traditional, credit union down the street. Where did you raise the debt exactly?
Initially it was Excel KKR.
Okay. Is that like a mezz financing or type of
well, they actually, we were the second deal out of this fund that was just purely a fund designed to give debt to like growth companies.
Yeah, wow.
But they do a lot of growth investing and other things. And it's funny, I got introduced to them because they were trying to invest in us, like, as a growth business. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm not interested. And then maybe like 3 months later, they came back to like, hey, we've talked to a lot of people who are not interested. We're actually making a new fund that is a debt fund. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And that was like in the back of my mind when we were doing this deal. And we talked to a lot of different folks about it. And to be clear, it was a really interesting process because they vetted us as a SaaS business. So they came in and they looked at all of our SaaS metrics, they looked at the growth and the churn and expansion and everything. And it was not just a pure financial evaluation, which later stage debt or traditional debt normally is. It's just like, tell me what your EBITDA is.
Sure.
And I'll figure out, the leverage ratio I'm comfortable with, and I will give you, and that's like how it works. But this was a just different thing. And when we went to the closing dinner for the deal, Samantha Shows, who's the partner there who like did the deal, I'll never forget what she said. Like, everyone's really excited. The deal is happening. And we signed all the paperwork and we went to like a steakhouse, and we cheers. And Samantha said, we're so excited and we've seen everything and we know that you will pay us. Like this feels like a guarantee to us.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. Like, first of all, the same, like, this is what it feels like to me too, is like, someone understands our business as well as we do. And like, yeah, this really should be a guarantee that we can make this happen. Like, let's go and do it. And they were amazing partners to us. But the way this stuff works, of course, we were not profitable when we did that initial deal.
Correct.
And so that they were taking on more risk by doing that. And therefore the interest rate was a lot higher. And then it was, 18 months later or less, that we were profitable enough we could go to more traditional banks and do that like normal EBITDA thing and, cut our interest rate to like a third of what it was in the first place. So, I mean, they're great partners. I think if you're at that stage and looking for something like that, like, they're definitely worth talking to. But if you already have a lot of EBITDA, consistent EBITDA, then it's you can go to a more normal bank to get that.
So you and your partner had this moment where you said, we're not happy.
Mm-hmm.
Then you raised the debt.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went to the drawing board on what do we do? What's our strategy? Can you walk through how you went from unhappy to confident in the strategy moving forward? What was that process? Who did you involve? How did that go down?
What a great question. So that summer, we were, we had this meeting I mentioned before, show and tell, where anyone could get up and present on anything. And it was always like when we had show and tell yesterday, I still do it. It's really a fun thing to go to because you see all this cool work, and some of it's like really high level and some of it's really specific. Someone's like, I just redesigned this page and like, X number of people hit it a month, but like, we think this is gonna be a really delightful moment and blah, 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 blah. And you're like, yeah. And then right next to it, someone's like, and here's this massive like partnership that's happening or whatever. So it's this like energizing thing. And that summer, when we were basically realizing we weren't going to sell, we were also at a funny moment where we were saying like we were making this mistake as we kind of like hired too aggressively and took on too much of thinking like a $17 million business is a big business. And I feel like it was this mistake of like, quote, I've made this mistake a couple of times. I try not to make it, and maybe saying it right now will help me not make it again. But it's just like when you try to quote play business, and you're like, oh well, maybe we should have, maybe we should have lines of business. Maybe that's the secret. Like maybe we should have multiple different types of customers, and we'll like sell our cogs over here, like Amazon. We'll do this other thing over here. It's very easy to come up with ideas that all might be great businesses in general. But one of the things that we were just like not paying close enough attention to is like, actually, we were pretty small. And that size of business, if you're distracting people, the cost is going to be large.
Yep.
And I remember we had a show and tell that summer, and I had met this guy who was actually still is a professor at Emory Business School. And he focuses on like strategic alignment. His name is Dr. Michael Sachs. And I'd met him through a friend who has like another startup that had scaled to like massive success. And he's like, hey, like you're telling me about all this stuff you guys are doing and like feeling distracted. Like you should have this guy, Dr. Michael Sachs, like just have him come in and like let him see what you notice. And so he came in, he went to the show and tell, and I was like really proud of the show and tell because there's all this different stuff happening. And then we caught up right after. He's like, wow, look at, you guys are doing a lot. I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, oh, you've got people focused on enterprise over here. You've got people focused on like, prosumer over here. You've got people, and like, they're all in the same meeting. They were all presenting different things. He said, I don't know how you can do all this stuff at your size. I'm like, well, we're doing it. And he's like, yeah, but are people actually, do they get it? Like, are people actually aligned? And I'm like, it all makes sense to me. I assume they're aligned. And, I go start talking to people. We do some internal surveys. They're not aligned. They're confused. And actually show and tell, which I thought was energizing because I like this like chaotic, like creative, like kind of melee of stuff, is actually really confusing people because you have someone who's over there trying to make something cheaper. And you have someone else who's like doing a partnership and selling things at like a premium price. And you have someone else who's like building things for developers or whatever. And they're all three things. You can't do all three in one. Like it's actually, they're all three are different. And it was a byproduct of this kind of like going too fast, hiring too much, thinking we're bigger than we are, thinking that success is headcount when it's not. And so we realized like we had to focus. Like that summer at the same time that I was figuring out what to do with the buyback, because it took about 4 months from like deciding not to sell to do the buyback. And we actually told the team from the beginning, hey, we're not going to sell the company right now. And they're like, what are you going to do? What's going to happen with our options? I'm like, I don't know, but I'm going to tell you as I figure it out. And so at the same time I'm telling them this, I'm realizing that we have this strategic misalignment. And so we just started zeroing in and doing more research and getting closer and closer to the customer and realizing that like our market was starting to get a lot bigger. And what that meant is that we had to get focused. And instead of going even more broad, the secret to scale is getting even more focused.
So how did that change how you do show and tells now?
Well, it's changed dramatically because once we started to focus on strategic alignment, being really clear about who the best target customer for us is, being really clear about how we're going to win, that changed what we're building. That changed how we serve customers. It changed, like you can't be the cheapest and you can't be the most premium and custom at the same time. Like you need different cultures to do those different things. You also can't be the most innovative and do those other things at the same time. Like you have to pick. And picking is really important because there's cultural implications of picking. There's hiring implications of picking. And so we just got more like, if you came to a show and tell now, you'd be like, oh, this is all perfectly aligned.
So is it fair to say you picked a strategic direction and then the show and tells became about how to support the strategic direction?
Yes.
Instead of the show and tells could go in any strategic direction that they selected.
That's exactly right.
Okay. And that Dr. Michael Sachs is the one that kind of pointed out, hey, you kind of have to pick your strategy. Yeah. Then let people be innovative about the tactics on how they want to accomplish that vision.
And the other thing that he helped me see is that culture is how you enact strategy.
Good. Tell me more. Love it.
Yeah. So basically, like, there's an example that I think is my favorite example. I feel like it's the easiest to understand, which is, let's say you're staying at a hotel, and there's 3 different hotels you could stay at. There's a Motel 6, there's a W hotel, and then there's the Ritz. Motel 6 is trying to be the cheapest. The W is going to try to be like the product leader. They're going to try to be the most innovative. And the Ritz is going to be, they're going to try to solve every possible need you have as a customer. Like, that's going to be their goal. The same action should be praised or punished differently based on the strategy, and that means the culture should be different. So I'll give you an example. I'm in bed, I lie down, pillow's uncomfortable. It's a terrible pillow. Motel 6, call the front desk. Hey, I need a new pillow. They're like, sorry. They should say, sorry, that's all we got. You're staying at a Motel 6. Like, you got the cheapest. Now, if someone comes to me and they're like, oh, what can I do for you? Let me go find some other pillow, and they're spending much of time. Like, they're spending time looking for other stuff. They're actually being inefficient, and that is bad. And they shouldn't have different types of pillows. Like, their whole thing is being the cheapest. Like, so that would be like, you should punish the person for trying to help the customer in that case. You should praise them for telling them just stick with what you got. You go to the W. W is trying to win with like innovation. If you stay at W, there's like oxygen in the room, like little oxygen tanks. And other things at the W are like have piano bars and sushi bars. They'll have all these other like interesting events like happening at a W. Call the W, call the front desk. Pillow sucks. They're like, oh, we've got some different ones in the closet for you. Like, go check out. There's a Tempur-Pedic. There's this. There's that. If you need something else, like, let me know. I'll bring it up. But also, did you know we're doing this event tonight? You should come. It's gonna be really fun. And like, drinks are on us. Like, come on down. And you're like, wow, this is so different than any other hotel. I feel so cool and hip. Like, this is like, they're selling me on what's making the W different. Now, if they call up and say, just shut up and take the pillow you got, that's not good. That should be punished at the W. What should be praised is telling you about the other stuff. Now, the Ritz. You're at the Ritz. They should solve every problem. You call the front desk, pillow sucks. Oh, I'm so terribly sorry, sir. We'll be right there. And they show up with like the array of pillows, and they put them out. And they're like, hey, we did some research on you. We know this is your favorite type of wine. So this bottle's on us. You go down to the gift shop. This is a true story. Someone at Wistia, this actually happened at, like, I heard all this, the strategy stuff. Like their kid had lost their stuffed animal, like forgot to bring it on the trip. They go to the gift shop, and the gift shop people heard that. So they just gave it to them for free. They just gave them like a teddy bear for free. And the teddy bear costs like $50. Like, just take it. And like the Ritz will go above and beyond to solve your problem. So what should be praised in that world is going above and beyond. And the people who work there have like cash in their pocket to solve problems for customers. What should be punished is basically losing the opportunity to like solve the customer's problem. And so the culture is different in all those cases. The culture is enacting the strategy in all those cases. And what is praised and punished must be different in all of those cases. And I think when you think about it like that, when you look at any market, it's almost like, all right, you want to be the cheapest. Everything has to be about efficiency. Everything has to be about cutting costs. And there can only be one cheapest. So, if that's your strategy, that's got to be all you do, is like maniacally bringing prices down, maniacally operating with more and more efficiency. And then if you're doing the product leadership thing, then you need to be innovating. So how are you constantly encouraging that innovation? How do you have the safe space to do that? How do you make sure that people are taking creative risks? And you have to not only tolerate, but celebrate risk taking. And on the at more like enterprise side or custom side, you're gonna look at the service that people are giving and making sure that the service is like a high enough quality. And that's what you're going to be praising. And that's what you're going to be encouraging more of. And so I think for us, we figured out we're that middle, we're the innovation. Yep. And so it's just like, how do we center the culture around that? And it's worked. I mean, I can't tell you, it's worked incredibly well. And one other thing I'll say and now that I've explained this entire thing, it's like, in each of these options, like just the price you end up charging is very different. So like Motel 6, cheapest, you're going to go, it's the cheapest price, but you're trying to do volume. Innovation, people will pay a premium. And it's different groups that care about different types of innovation, but people will pay more for a thing that's innovative. And on the custom side, that's where people will pay the most. That's where people will spend a lot less people, but those people will spend huge amounts of money to have every problem solved. So just like thinking about your business and how those things fit together, I think is really important. And centering your culture around like reinforcing whichever strategy you pick is also incredibly important.
What a good example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the example. And, if we think back through and recap, right, of where Wistia has come and where, the path, and I asked you a question very early on about trials and tribulations and how you got through those. I mean, I think you went through an incredible case study here of your business where you were growing for growth's sake. You were growing, you're kind of splattering things in your sessions there where people were bringing new products and new offerings to the table. And it was really exciting because there was a little bit of, and this, I think 99% of entrepreneurs struggle with the shiny object syndrome. Oh my gosh, that's great. Let's go do that. And let's go do that. And when you had a little awakening here that distractions were being caused by this and your business was not the size to be able to do it, was around the same time when you started realizing, well, wait a minute, this is what we want to do. And we enjoy being profitable in this very focused environment. And there's one thing you said in passing real quick, and it is such a key moment of this podcast and message, was the secret to scale is focus. Love that. Love that quote right there. And the way you enact strategy is your culture. And the cascading communication of here are objectives and goals and strategy, and that cascading through the organization, creating the culture of focus that helps you scale. Love the way you brought all that stuff together. That's fantastic. Talk to us real quick about you have a podcast as well called Talking Too Loud. What is that podcast all about, and why should our listeners go take a listen?
Yeah. So Talking Too Loud is a show designed around this idea that when I get excited, I talk too loud, as you can tell. I cannot control the volume of my voice. This has been true since I was a child, but it's even funny. Yesterday, I saw some people at Wistia in person for the first time in a while. And someone was like, oh, I forgot just how loud you are in person. Like we're so used to Zoom and I can just turn you down that I can't turn you down here. I've always had a lot of conversations with entrepreneurs and creatives and investors that are just like constantly part of growing a business. And I learn a lot. And the goal of the show is just opening up those conversations and kind of that journey that I'm on, scaling and building a business and, in this ever evolving world around us. There's like, I've had filmmakers on the show. I've had founders of Square. I've had, some folks who are running amazing businesses who are like pretty under the radar that most people don't hear about. Mm-hmm. But really it's just like, it's funny. I'm sure you feel the same way, but like any show, any podcast, I think to some degree has to be selfish. Like you have to believe, you have to enjoy the process. Or you can't, or it's not going to work. Like,
absolutely.
And I mean, I feel that way about building a business. I definitely feel that way about building a show. There's like, you have to actually enjoy the conversations and feel like you're learning. And so Talking Too Loud for me is that outlet. It's that excuse for people to kind of come on the journey a little bit as I'm learning and scaling and hopefully, get inspired and try something maybe that they wouldn't have tried otherwise or just think about the world a little differently.
Yeah, thanks for that. One last question for me. You had mentioned, probably half of the episode ago about companies just figuring out when they should use video marketing. Mm-hmm. So for the benefit of the entrepreneurs who are listening, can you give them just your brief shortcut on when should companies use video marketing?
Now. I think that's the simple answer is now. I think the way I think about this is actually like, let's talk about what audiences want. And what a modern audience wants today, you can get a sample of it. I think that probably the simplest one is looking at like the New York Times. So if you look at the New York Times today is not just written. The New York Times, you can listen to it. You can listen to their podcast the daily and like the one most important story a day, but they literally have a tab in their app now that's listen, where you can just listen to stories, or you can watch. They make a huge amount of content that you can watch and engage with. And I think that audiences expect that they can choose how they consume and interact with companies, brands, media in general. And some people want to watch, and some people want to listen, and some people want to read. And the readers are going to probably skim more, and sometimes you're going to look at a transcript of something and skim that. But I think it's like a recognition that when it's not actually that hard to make the content anymore, it maps back to like everyone learns differently and engages differently with content. So the truth is, like, you should be making video now. I guarantee you there are people in your audience who would rather watch something. And then it's asking yourself the question, where is that going to be most impactful? That's the question, right? Like, I'm not saying every single thing you make should be a video and an audio and text, but I think you should give your audience ways to engage with all those formats. And the stuff that usually works best on video, the stuff where the videos can have the biggest impact, is something where normally you'd talk to somebody in person, or you talk to someone through a demo online, or you'd help someone through part of your product, or helps them with something complex. Like the visually complex things that need to be done in an order, things that involve a story, all of those things are going to you're going to have an easier time communicating in a video than you would usually in the other formats. Yeah. But I really think you have to do all of them. And I think that the missed opportunity is when people think, and I've been there, don't get me wrong, like 5 years ago, if you asked this question, I would have said video is the most important one. Yeah. And that's not my answer today, because I think my answer is more nuanced of like, well, I think video is probably the most emotional medium because it's hitting you with everything at once. But the truth is, some people never want to watch video, but they will always listen to everything. And so the big miss is when you don't actually do all three of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do know, for those who want to learn more about Wistia, I mean, I think your website provides a lot of great tools and product about how you can easily capture video, in your own environments, and tips and tricks and tools that you guys promote on your site. So I'd highly encourage everybody to go take a look at that. I did myself a year or two ago when I first met you, Chris. And I thought the tools were great. And I think what you guys are creating is, there's a lot of talk right now about centralization of technology, right? Mm-hmm. The Facebooks, the Googles, mm-hmm. and they are controlling your data. And, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Yep.
And then you have, companies like Wistia that are coming around and saying, no, we can provide you with the tools that you control, you mm-hmm. own, you have the analytics, you have your data, as opposed to giving that to some of these large centralized companies. So I really think the narrative is going really strongly in that direction, and would highly encourage, it would be marketing folks listening to this episode, or entrepreneurs, get your marketing folks listening to this episode and take a look at what Wistia has to offer. So I really appreciate you sharing some of the deep stories of Wistia and how you got to where you are today, and kudos to what you've done. I'm really excited to see where you go next.
Hey, look, thanks for having me. This was super fun. Love the questions and the podcast. So just a delight to chat with you both.
Thanks, Chris.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
John, his example on culture enacting strategy, I was gripped by his description that was just so accurate of a Motel 6 versus the W versus the Ritz. And at first when he said that, culture is how you enact strategy, and I took a note, I'm like, tell me more. Oh my gosh, there's a level of depth in that I've not really considered on how culture really does enact strategy.
Yeah. Well, it also plays into, I loved when he was talking about the time he had an opportunity to sell his business. And he sat down with his partners, he's having this gut check moment. And they're like, well, what are we going to do if we sell this business? We'd want to do this business. Who do we want to work with? We'd want to work with the people in this business. What kind of culture we want to create? We want to create this culture, and you could tell that his enthusiasm for the business he's in is phenomenal. And when you think about culture enacting strategy and the way that he's evolved his business to, we're actually going to buy this business back. We're going to put our money where our mouth is. And we want to make sure now we're hyper-focused, right? Because what we saw before was we were growing for growth's sake. We were a little bit all over the place. And that happens to a lot of entrepreneurs. Many, many entrepreneurs, myself included, get so excited about growth, so excited about that top line revenue number, right? And you grow for growth's sake. You don't make more money. Actually, you make a lot less money. I think the year before he sold his business, they were losing money. And the next year,
$500,000.
Yeah, and then they killed it the next year, right? They just got
$6 million. It went from $500,000 in 1 year to of EBITDA negative $500,000 to positive $6 million in a year.
It's crazy growth. I mean, but let me retract that. It's growth in EBITDA, but the business probably didn't grow revenue wise. It actually may have even retracted revenue wise. Right. They just got more focused on who their customer is, what they're doing, and that became their culture. That became their strategy. So I agree with you. I love that culture is how you enact strategy. And I think the other piece that he said that I can't highlight enough is the secret to scale is focus.
Which the way you're repeating that, I think what you're looking at in that is really the strategic alignment, the focus on one strategy. Is that what you're highlighting there?
Well, maybe, but what we talked about before in one of our prior episodes was growth versus scale.
Yep.
Growth means you're going after revenue streams all over the place. You're trying to grow your top line revenue.
You have unorganized show and tell because you love it and it gives you energy. But
that's right. Really give me more things to show me that we can go into so we can grow some more, right? It doesn't mean you're more profitable. Actually, in this case, he was less profitable. They were growing like crazy, but less profitable.
Right.
And less profitable. And his partner and him were so unhappy because they were growing, which means they're working longer hours, they're hiring more people, they got more problems, right? More revenue, more problems. And they started realizing, oh my gosh, why are we doing all of this? And when they made a decision to scale, which is to grow their EBITDA percentage from a negative to a very high positive EBITDA percentage, which is scaling, their happiness came back, right? They owned more of the business. They were in full control of their business. So that focus in their business really helped them scale.
The focus on what, though, John? Is there something that you're highlighting? There's something I'm missing in how you're highlighting that.
The focus on what their strategy is, as opposed to going after professional customers this way and enterprise ones this way and different price points. They focus their strategy on who do we want to be.
So it does connect with this strategic alignment. It's interesting because if you go the secret to scale is focus on strategic alignment or having one strategy. And then you go below that, the way that you highlight it and go, strategy is enacted by culture and then cascading communication through that culture. It is a great, succinct kind of pyramid in my mind on how he's organized his business.
Yeah, and elegantly organized the communication, which I think was a key moment for him when he realized, because this whole cascading communication piece on the focus and strategy, I believe happened at the same time that they bought back the business. They got hyper-focused. Okay, hold on a second. We got to make sure that the whole organization's clear on who we are and what we're doing. And how we're going to do that is they self-learned how to cascade the communication. That I think the one thing he said was, how I manage my senior management team is critical to my business, right? Because whatever information they have or how we host meetings or how we do things at Wistia needs to be cascaded from them downwards through the 150 people. And when he learned how to really take a clear and concise strategy and cascade that communication down, the results became phenomenal from what we're hearing, right? So I love that cascading communication. I had an opportunity a few years ago. We did a survey amongst our team and solicited feedback in that survey in terms of what are things that are going well and what are some of the things that aren't going well. And one of the things that was we were growing so fast that the company felt there was a massive lack of communication. No one really knew where we were going, or they kept hearing about different things through the rumor mill, not necessarily from the company. And we decided that year, okay, you know what? We're going to make this the year of communication and cascading communication. So everybody's clear on where we're going and what we're doing. And that was a huge pivot moment for the business, because then from that point forward, everybody was 100% clear on the strategy. We were cascading the information. Way too many times, I think senior management teams and executives will continue to build their strategies and execute their strategies without actually communicating throughout the entire organization in an elegant manner, like Chris has done, what exactly they're doing and why they're doing it.
So when you did that, was it similar to what Chris's Cascading Communication is from, use the ratios for the size of the business, but a 3-person exec team, 10-person senior management, 25 managers, and then he went to 150. Did you do something similar in the layering of that, or how did you go about it?
Yeah, I'd say so. What we did is we would come up with a company strategy at a macro level with let's call our division leaders, who would be the senior management in this case. We come up with what the objectives were of their respective divisions, right? We bring all those up into one company objective and strategy and vision. And then we would cascade it down. So they would then go to their divisions and go, okay, here's the company's objective. Here's our component of the company's objective. Now we got to go in our division. Here's what we need to do. And then people within that organization or that division would then come up with their cascading contributions to that strategy. So when they, we didn't have a show and tell, but if we did have a show and tell, they would come to the show and tell to bring something that was a part of their component for their division strategy, which fed into the company's overall strategy. So, cascading up or down, either way, the communication was very clear on what are we doing? What are we trying to do?
Well, I got to say, one of the things I was so impressed by with Chris is not only is he a subject matter expert in his field of expertise of video marketing, but he also is a very astute businessman.
Yeah, no doubt.